Eastern State Penitentiary, the prison of shadows and whispers. Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, once stood as a symbol of reform and justice. Designed in 1829, it was one of the most revolutionary prisons in the world. Its creators envisioned it as a place where criminals would undergo true penitence in isolation, reflecting on their misdeeds in the silence of their cells. But over time, the penitentiary became a breeding ground for despair, madness, and suffering. Today, its dark history lingers, haunting the crumbling walls, filling the air with the faint sounds of footsteps, whispers, and the chilling presence of those who never left. Eastern State was unlike any other prison in its day. The architects of this massive fortress designed it with long, narrow corridors radiating from a central hub like spokes on a wheel. Each cell was built to enforce total isolation. Prisoners were kept alone, forbidden to speak, with no contact with the outside world. The guards would even cover their faces to ensure that no prisoner would ever see them. This psychological torture was meant to lead to repentance, but for most, it only led to madness. Over time, the dark energy of despair seemed to seep into the very walls of the prison. Inmates who were once filled with hope slowly descended into madness. Some prisoners clawed at the stone walls until their fingers bled. Others whispered to invisible beings in their cells, and a few even took their own lives. It wasn't long before the penitentiary became known as a place where tortured souls lingered long after death. By the early 1900s, Eastern State was notorious for its cruel punishments and strict regime. Solitary confinement was no longer enforced as rigorously, but the psychological damage had already been done. One of the most infamous areas of the prison was Cell Block 12, known for its eerie noises and disturbing sightings. Guards and inmates alike began reporting strange occurrences in this section of the prison. Footsteps echoed down the hallways, though no one was there. Doors would slam shut without warning. In the dead of night, soft whispers filled the air, coming from the empty cells. Some said they could hear the faint sound of weeping, as if the building itself was crying for the lost souls trapped within. Objects in the house began to move on their own. Windows and doors slammed shut with no apparent reason. At night, the family was awakened by blood-curdling screams coming from the walls. Marianne often felt a chilling breeze pass by her. One night, she was jolted awake by an invisible force pushing her. When she opened her eyes, she saw an image that would haunt her forever. The ghost of Maria stood at the foot of her bed, her hollow eyes staring, her hands outstretched as if begging for help. The family was tormented night after night by footsteps, knocking, and the eerie whispers that never seemed to stop. One evening, as Marianne sat in the parlor, she felt an icy chill sweep across her, followed by a faint, sorrowful sigh, like a cry for help from a distant world. But the climax of the horror came on a stormy night. Marianne was alone in her bedroom when the door slowly creaked open by itself. She tried to close it, but couldn't. In a moment of sheer terror, Maria appeared before her, her gaunt face filled with anguish. She pointed at Marianne, her lips moving as if to speak, but no words came out. Then she vanished, leaving Marianne frozen in fear, her body trembling from the chilling encounter. The rumors of supernatural occurrences at Borley Rectory quickly spread, attracting the attention of paranormal investigators. One of the most renowned investigators, Harry Price, decided to take on the case and even spent time living in the haunted house. Harry Price and his team witnessed inexplicable phenomena. Objects flew through the air, strange sounds echoed from nowhere, and most disturbingly, Maria's ghost occasionally appeared, gliding silently through the darkened halls. In a daring experiment, Harry decided to use a Ouija board to communicate with the spirit. As soon as they began, the planchette moved furiously, and terrifying messages appeared. "I was buried alive. I cannot rest. Find me." After gathering enough evidence, Harry and his team decided to dig around the old church grounds. To their horror, they unearthed a woman's skeleton buried deep in the earth, believed to be Maria. Though her remains were found, her spirit never truly vanished. In 1939, Borley Rectory mysteriously burned down, but the tale of Maria and the ghosts that haunted the site continued. Many witnesses reported hearing her cries in the wind on cold nights, the anguished scream of a soul unable to find peace. Borley Rectory is not merely a haunted house. It is a symbol of suffering, forbidden love, and horrifying punishment. The story of Maria and the paranormal events at Borley Rectory has become a chilling part of history, making people shudder with fear whenever it is mentioned. Story 2: Eastern State Penitentiary, the Prison of Shadows and Whispers. Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, once stood as a symbol of reform and justice. Designed in 1829, it was one of the most revolutionary prisons in the world. Its creators envisioned it as a place where criminals would undergo true penitence in isolation, reflecting on their misdeeds in the silence of their cells. But over time, the penitentiary became a breeding ground for despair, madness, and suffering. Today, its dark history lingers, haunting the crumbling walls, filling the air with the faint sounds of footsteps, whispers, and the chilling presence of those who never left. Eastern State was unlike any other prison in its day. The architects of this massive fortress designed it with long, narrow corridors radiating from a central hub, like spokes on a wheel. Each cell was built to enforce total isolation. Prisoners were kept alone, forbidden to speak, with no contact with the outside world. The guards would even cover their faces to ensure that no prisoner would ever see them. This psychological torture was meant to lead to repentance, but for most, it only led to madness. Over time, the dark energy of despair seemed to seep into the very walls of the prison. Inmates who were once filled with hope slowly descended into madness. Some prisoners clawed at the stone walls until their fingers bled. Others whispered to invisible beings in their cells, and a few even took their own lives. It wasn't long before the penitentiary became known as a place where tortured souls lingered long after death. By the early 1900s, Eastern State was notorious for its cruel punishments and strict regime. Solitary confinement was no longer enforced as rigorously, but the psychological damage had already been done. One of the most infamous areas of the prison was Cell Block 12, known for its eerie noises and disturbing sightings. Guards and inmates alike began reporting strange occurrences in this section of the prison. Footsteps echoed down the hallways, though no one was there. Doors would slam shut without warning. In the dead of night, soft whispers filled the air, coming from the empty cells. Some said they could hear the faint sound of weeping, as if the building itself was crying for the lost souls trapped within. One particular night, a guard named Samuel was patrolling Cell Block 12 alone. He had always been skeptical of the ghost stories and brushed off the other guards' warnings. As he walked down the dimly lit corridor, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind him. He turned quickly, but there was no one there. His heart raced, but he continued walking, chalking it up to his imagination. A few minutes later, the footsteps returned, this time closer. Samuel stopped, his breath catching in his throat. He turned again, but the hallway was empty. Suddenly, a voice whispered his name, soft and raspy, "Samuel." Frozen in fear, Samuel scanned the hallway but saw nothing. As he backed away, he caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing at the end of the corridor. The figure didn't move, its dark shape looming in the faint light. Samuel blinked, and it was gone. He ran from the cell block, vowing never to patrol that area alone again. The most terrifying aspect of Eastern State was the solitary confinement cells, also known as the hole. These underground chambers were where the most unruly prisoners were sent, often left in complete darkness for weeks. The conditions were brutal. Prisoners were stripped of their clothes, left in cold, damp cells with no light and barely any food. Many emerged from these cells utterly broken, their minds shattered beyond repair. It's said that some of the most violent hauntings occur in the solitary cells. Guards have reported hearing loud banging from the cells, even though they were empty. Some have seen shadows moving in the pitch-black darkness, while others have felt a cold hand brush their skin, even though they were alone. One former guard, James, recalled an encounter he had while locking up the solitary wing one evening. As he closed the final cell, he heard a faint knocking from inside. Thinking a prisoner had somehow been locked in by mistake, he opened the door, only to find the cell completely empty. The knocking grew louder, this time echoing from all directions. James quickly shut the door and hurried to leave. But as he walked down the narrow hallway, the air grew colder, and he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Suddenly he heard a voice whisper, Get out, before it's too late. James felt a chill run down his spine as the words echoed through the darkness. He turned to see a pale figure standing at the end of the hallway, its eyes hollow and expressionless. The figure stretched out its hand toward him, but before James could react, it vanished into the shadows. He never returned to the solitary confinement area again. One of the most famous prisoners to be housed at Eastern State was Al Capone. Even though Capone's cell was lavishly decorated compared to the others, his time at the penitentiary was anything but peaceful. Capone claimed that he was haunted by the ghost of James Clark, one of the victims of the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Other prisoners often heard Capone screaming in the middle of the night, begging for mercy from the ghost that tormented him. Capone would often wake up in a cold sweat, shouting at the unseen figure that seemed to appear in the darkness of his cell. He claimed that Clark's ghost would stand at the foot of his bed, staring at him with cold, dead eyes, a permanent reminder of the blood on his hands. By 1971, Eastern State Penitentiary was abandoned, its dark history sealed within its crumbling walls. However, the spirits that were trapped there never left. Over the years, visitors have reported countless supernatural encounters. Many feel a sense of being watched as they walk through the cell blocks. Some have even heard the sound of footsteps following them, only to turn around and find nothing but empty air. Tour guides often tell the story of a young woman who visited the penitentiary with her family. As they toured the solitary confinement area, she felt a sudden cold breeze brush against her face. She turned to see a shadow dart past her, disappearing into the darkness. Later that day, she developed strange bruises on her arms, as though someone had grabbed her. But the most chilling encounter came when a group of paranormal investigators visited the penitentiary. As they explored the abandoned cell blocks late at night, they captured an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon recording. The voice on the tape was unmistakable. It whispered, "We're still here." Eastern State Penitentiary stands as a reminder of the darkness that can fester in places of punishment and pain. The ghosts of its past linger, their presence felt in every echo of a footstep, every distant whisper, and every shadow that moves in the corner of your eye. Those who enter may leave, but the spirits trapped inside are bound to the prison forever, reliving their torment for all eternity. Story 3. The Hole of Horror at Alcatraz. Alcatraz, the infamous prison located amidst the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay, has long stood as a symbol of absolute isolation and brutal punishment. Originally built as a military fortress, Alcatraz became one of the strictest federal prisons in the 1930s. It housed some of America's most dangerous criminals, including Al Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, and Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz. Yet, the terror of the prison was not confined to its cold stone walls and harsh regulations, but also lay within the deep, dark pit that every inmate dreaded, the Hole. The Hole, also known as the Black Pit, was a place where prisoners were confined in total darkness. It was the punishment for those who committed severe infractions within the prison. Situated deep underground, the room had no light, no sound from the outside world. There was only eternal darkness and suffocating silence. Many inmates who were sent there lost all sense of time, unable to distinguish between day and night. The experience of those locked in the Hole was not just one of extreme loneliness, but also of an unseen terror that slowly crept over them. Some prisoners claimed that when trapped in the dark, they could feel the presence of invisible entities, trapped souls, wandering in the confined space. They could not see them, but they could feel cold breaths on the back of their necks, hear footsteps without a figure, and hear terrifying screams coming from nowhere. One of the most famous stories about the Hole comes from a prisoner named Joseph. He had been thrown into the Hole for fighting with another inmate. When the door slammed shut and darkness engulfed him, Joseph didn't feel immediate fear. At first, he thought he would only have to endure a few days in silence. But he was wrong. On the first night, Joseph heard faint whispers, like someone was standing right next to him, talking to him through the cold, still air. He tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a hallucination caused by the darkness. But then the whispers grew louder, clearer, as if someone were standing right beside him, speaking in a language he couldn't understand. Joseph screamed, demanding the guards open the door, but no one came. A chilling sensation crawled over his skin, and he felt invisible hands touching him. He tried to stand up, but his legs seemed to be weighed down by some unseen force. The whispers turned into maniacal laughter, and then, from nowhere, a high-pitched scream echoed through the room, piercing Joseph's ears and sending him collapsing to the floor. When Joseph was released from the hole a few days later, he was no longer the same man. He became silent, constantly looking over his shoulder, as if terrified of something invisible. Joseph recounted his story to other inmates, but no one believed him. Only those who had been in the hole truly understood that, in that deep darkness, there was not only loneliness, but also the restless souls of the damned. The legend of the hole spread over the years. Many other inmates had similar experiences to Joseph's. Some heard mysterious footsteps pacing in the dark, some felt eerie touches on their skin, while others heard heart-wrenching cries from invisible spirits. A former guard named Robert once said that during a night patrol, he heard knocking coming from inside the hole. Thinking someone was trapped inside, he opened the door, but the room was completely empty. As he turned away, a blood-curdling scream erupted from the room, freezing Robert in place. He quickly slammed the door shut and never returned to that area again. One of the spirits believed to haunt the hole is a prisoner who was once held in cell 14D. According to legend, this prisoner was sent into the hole for causing trouble. After a few days, guards checked on him and found him dead. Strangely, the man had died with a look of sheer terror on his face, as if he had witnessed something horrifying in the darkness. Since then, prisoners and guards frequently report seeing the shadowy figure of this man wandering near cell 14D. Some claim to have seen him standing in the dark corners, staring with empty eyes. Those who meet his gaze describe an overwhelming sense of fear, as if they are being sucked into the very despair that consumed him. Since Alcatraz closed in 1963, paranormal investigators and visitors have flocked to the site, hoping to uncover the mysteries of the hauntings. One of the most active areas of the prison remains the hole. Many have captured strange phenomena, whispers recorded on audio devices, shadowy figures darting through the darkness, and sudden screams erupting from the abandoned room. One paranormal investigation team conducted an overnight exploration of the hole. They brought cameras, audio recorders, and energy measuring equipment. As they sat in the darkness, a soft sound echoed from the corner of the room. Then a low, raspy laugh began to fill the space, sending chills down everyone's spine. One of the investigators asked, "Who is here?" There was no answer, but just as they were about to leave, a quiet but distinct voice captured on the recorder. "We're always here. Alcatraz, with all the crimes and despair it has witnessed, remains one of the most haunted places in the world. The spirits trapped in the hole are still there, wandering in the eternal darkness, waiting, forever lost in their loneliness. The screams and footsteps in the night are not just echoes of the past, but are the cries of souls eternally imprisoned in terror." Story 4. The Haunting of Winchester Mystery House. In San Jose, California, there stands a mysterious house that sends chills down the spine of anyone who hears its name, Winchester Mystery House. Not only is it famous for its intricate and bizarre architecture, but it is also known for the terrifying stories of ghosts and the haunting feelings it evokes. Built by Sarah Winchester, the heiress of one of America's most famous gun manufacturers, this house is said to have been constructed to appease the souls of those killed by the Winchester rifle. Sarah Winchester was born into a wealthy and happy family, but her life took a tragic turn when her husband and daughter died under heartbreaking circumstances. The grief and loss plunged her into despair. One lonely night, she sought the counsel of a psychic who predicted that death would continue to haunt her and her family unless she built a house for the spirits of those killed by the Winchester guns. Unable to live in fear, Sarah decided to embark on the monumental task of constructing a massive house. She believed this would be the only way to protect herself from the pursuing spirits. The house would be a sanctuary for these souls, and she hoped that the building would keep them at peace. Sarah began building the house in 1884, and the construction never truly ended. With over 600 rooms, countless endless hallways, staircases that led to walls, and doors that opened to nowhere, the house became a bizarre maze. Architects and builders continually had to change plans because Sarah frequently requested design changes without any clear reasoning. Every night, when the workers left, strange noises echoed throughout the house. Many felt as though they were being watched, and sometimes they even heard whispers as if the spirits were conversing. No one dared stay too long, and many refused the job due to the eerie presence they felt. One evening, as the house had reached a substantial completion, a group of tourists visited to explore the place. They entered the house as twilight descended, with their flashlights barely illuminating the dimly lit corners. As they walked through a long hallway, one member of the group, a woman named Jessica, suddenly heard whispers surrounding her, as if thousands of souls were in conversation. Feeling an icy breeze sweep over her, Jessica looked towards an ajar door, with faint light emanating from inside. Curiosity piqued, she approached, but as she stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind her. Trapped and panicked, she turned back, only to see a figure, a woman in a flowing white gown standing in the corner of the room, her empty eyes fixated on Jessica. "Help me," whispered the figure before vanishing into thin air. Sarah Winchester passed away in 1922, but many believe her spirit still wanders the halls of the house. Staff and visitors frequently report seeing the figure of a woman dressed in white moving through the rooms. They claim she often appears near windows, as if watching over those who have died by the rifle. One night, a maintenance worker who was working late experienced a strange occurrence. As he walked through one of the parlors, a door suddenly swung open, revealing a spectral woman standing there. He felt a chill run down his spine as he gazed into her sorrowful eyes. "I just want them to find peace," she whispered before fading into the foggy atmosphere of the house. This worker, after the encounter, vowed never to return to work at night. Although Sarah endeavored to build a sanctuary for herself and the souls, the reality was different. Many believe the ongoing construction trapped the souls within the house. Visitors and staff frequently reported bizarre phenomena: footsteps following them, laughter echoing from the rooms, and an overwhelming feeling of being watched from the shadows. When a team of paranormal investigators visited to examine the house, they captured numerous unusual occurrences, from flickering lights to strange sounds. One recording device picked up a whisper saying, "Help us," lingering in the air, as if the souls longed to be freed from their prison. One evening, a group of local college students decided to embark on a daring exploration of the Winchester Mystery House. Equipped with cameras, recording devices, and flashlights, they aimed to document any paranormal activities. As they stepped inside, a cold atmosphere enveloped them. The howling wind whistled through cracks, creating unsettling sounds. While exploring room by room, one student, Tom, noticed a small window with a glimmering light inside. He approached, but as he reached out to open it, a strong gust of wind pushed him back. He heard a chuckle resonate from the room. They quickly gathered, but saw no one there. Heart racing, they continued their exploration, but each step felt heavier with a sense of impending dread. As night fell, the lights from their flashlights began to flicker. They felt an undeniable sensation of being watched. One student, Lily, caught a glimpse of a hazy figure reflected in a mirror of one of the rooms. Calling her friends over, they all stared into the mirror, only to see a woman in white, her face sorrowful, as if pleading for something. As they continued their exploration, they stumbled upon a staircase leading to an upper floor. They decided to ascend, but just as their feet touched the first step, a loud bang erupted from below, startling them. The entire group turned, only to witness the front door slam shut and lock itself, as if the house didn't want them to leave. Screams of panic echoed as they realized they were trapped. One member tried to find a way out, but to no avail. Suddenly, the beam from their flashlights illuminated a familiar silhouette. It was Sarah Winchester. She stood there, her eyes filled with sadness, looking at them as though seeking help. "Release them," she whispered. The group understood that they were not merely trapped in the house, but entangled in the anguish and fears of the souls who lingered. They decided to unite their energy and find a way to set these spirits free. By combining their powers, they began reciting a prayer, hoping to bring peace to the trapped souls. As they prayed, whispers swirled around them, as if the spirits were responding to their call. The light in the house gradually brightened, and the heavy sensation began to dissipate. At last, a brilliant wave of light flooded the house, and the screams of panic faded into silence. Sarah Winchester's figure smiled gratefully, her eyes shining with appreciation. "Thank you," she whispered before dissolving into the light. The front door swung open, allowing the group to escape. They fled into the cool night air, exhilarated yet haunted by memories of the souls they had helped liberate. As dawn broke, they looked back at the house, a place where past and present intertwined, where haunting despair never truly vanished. They knew they had accomplished something monumental, and although the house still stood, it now held a renewed sense of hope. The whispers had ceased, and the souls were finally free. Their stories had been rewritten, offering visitors a sense of wonder and mystery, more profound than ever before. The Winchester Mystery House remains a curious architectural marvel, but now it carries with it a new sense of hope. The whispers have silenced, and the trapped souls can finally rest. Their tale has been shared, providing those who visit with a chilling and fascinating experience. Story 5: The Haunting of Bangkok Hospital. Nestled in the heart of Bangkok, hidden among the shimmering skyscrapers, stood an old hospital that whispered of secrets long forgotten. Once a beacon of hope, it had become a sinister place steeped in chilling tales of the supernatural. This hospital was infamous for the ghost of a tall man dressed in white, whose presence haunted the very corridors where he once walked as a revered doctor. Years ago, he had been a celebrated physician, known for his extraordinary skill. However, fate took a cruel turn during a routine surgery when a tragic error led to the death of a patient on the operating table. The tragedy shattered his career and burdened him with guilt so profound that it consumed him entirely. He died in agony, not just from the weight of his failure, but also from the whispered accusations of the staff and the families of those he couldn't save. The hospital had seen better days. Flickering lights danced in the dim hallways, casting elongated shadows that seemed to come alive. It was during one stormy night when a group of medical students ventured into the hospital for a night shift. Among them was Lynn, a curious and determined student eager to learn. Yet as the clock struck midnight, an unsettling sensation washed over her. As they moved through the corridors, Lynn noticed something peculiar. The air felt charged, thick with a foreboding energy. Her heart raced as she passed the old surgical rooms, the doors creaking ominously as if warning her to stay away. Despite the unease, her friends laughed, brushing off the hospital's haunted reputation as mere superstition. Later that night, Lynn found herself alone in a quiet wing of the hospital, her friends having wandered off to explore. It was then she heard the whispers, a soft, haunting sound that seemed to call her name. "Help me," the voice echoed, a desperate plea that chilled her to the bone. She followed the sound, her feet carrying her deeper into the hospital. Each step felt heavier, as if the shadows themselves were trying to pull her back. The voice led her to a room shrouded in darkness, the door slightly ajar. As she pushed it open, a freezing gust of wind swept past her, snuffing out the flickering overhead light. Inside the room stood the tall man in white. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. He looked at Lynn with an expression that spoke volumes, a mixture of despair and longing for redemption. "You must help me," he urged, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoed in her mind like thunder. Lynn felt an unexplainable connection to him, as if she could feel his anguish coursing through her veins. He gestured toward the surgical instruments, still stained with memories of past horrors. "I didn't save them," he lamented, "and now their souls are trapped here seeking justice." Determined to uncover the truth, Lynn delved into the hospital's records. What she found sent shivers down her spine. The tall doctor had made numerous mistakes, each more tragic than the last, and the spirits of his failed patients were said to roam the hospital, eternally bound to the place of their suffering. One particular case caught her attention, a young girl who died due to a misdiagnosis. Her family had mourned for years, never knowing the truth. Lynn felt a surge of responsibility to bring closure to these tormented souls. The whispers she heard weren't just cries for help, they were cries for acknowledgement and justice. With newfound resolve, Lynn organized a seance, inviting her friends and a local medium. The night was thick with tension as they gathered in the very room where she first encountered the ghost. The air crackled with energy, and shadows seemed to stretch towards them, eager for release. As the medium called forth the spirits, the atmosphere grew heavy. Lynn felt an icy breeze wrap around her, and the tall man in white appeared once more, his presence commanding yet sorrowful. He spoke to the medium, revealing the pain of his failures and the souls he had wronged. Suddenly, a loud crash reverberated through the room, and the lights flickered violently, plunging them into darkness. Panic ensued, but Lynn remained focused, urging the spirits to reveal their truths. The voice of the young girl rang out, clear and piercing. "I want my family to know the truth." In that moment, Lynn understood the full weight of the spirits' sorrow. They needed their stories told, their pain acknowledged. The tall man fell to his knees, his ghostly form trembling with regret. "I am so sorry," he wept, the sound echoing like a mournful wail through the room. "Help them find peace." With the medium's guidance, Lynn spoke directly to the spirits, promising to tell their stories and ensure they were remembered. The atmosphere shifted. The darkness that had enveloped the room began to lift, replaced by a warm, glowing light. The spirits, including the young girl, began to smile, their forms shimmering with relief. The seance ended, and the hospital felt different, lighter. Lynn emerged with a sense of purpose, determined to honor the lives of those lost. She reached out to the families of the deceased, sharing their stories and ensuring they would be remembered. As the years passed, the haunting presence of the tall man faded, replaced by a sense of calm. Lynn continued her studies, eventually becoming a doctor herself. She often returned to the hospital, now a place of healing rather than horror. The legend of the tall man in white transformed into a story of redemption, serving as a reminder of the importance of compassion and accountability in the medical profession. While the spirits may have found their peace, the stories of the haunted hospital continued to draw visitors. Tourists came to learn about its history, intrigued by the tales of the ghostly doctor and the lost souls. Lynn often shared her experiences, encouraging others to understand the importance of every life touched by medicine. As she stood in the hospital one night, she felt a familiar presence, a gentle warmth wrapping around her. The tall man in white appeared briefly, his expression now serene. Lynn smiled, knowing he had finally found his redemption. The hospital was no longer a place of despair. It was a testament to healing, love, and the bonds that transcend even death. In the end, the haunting of Bangkok Hospital became a story not just of fear, but of hope and healing, reminding everyone that even in the darkest of places, light can break through the shadows, and every soul deserves to be remembered. Story 6. The Haunting Cry in the Abandoned Operating Room. Deep within an aging hospital in the United States lay an abandoned wing, a place shrouded in mystery and sorrow. This part of the hospital had been sealed off for years, its doors locked, its hallways silent. Yet whispers of strange occurrences had persisted among the hospital staff. The most chilling of these stories was the sound of a child crying, echoing from an old, forgotten operating room where a tragedy had unfolded long ago. The story began decades earlier. A newborn had died due to a grievous medical error. The baby's life had slipped away during a routine surgery gone wrong, and the heartbroken family never recovered from the loss. Ever since, rumors spread about the sound of a baby crying, faint, heart-wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the abandoned operating room where the child had passed away. No one dared to enter the wing alone after dark, for fear of encountering the ghostly cries. Emily, a young nurse, had always been skeptical of ghost stories. She had heard the tales from older staff members but dismissed them as hospital folklore. One stormy night, while working a late shift, her curiosity got the best of her. The hospital was quiet, the rain tapping against the windows like soft fingers. As she finished her rounds, her mind drifted to the abandoned wing. It's just an old story, she thought, but a part of her couldn't resist investigating. She had heard enough from her colleagues, the eerie stories, the unsettling sounds. The dare from her friends to explore the wing had been a joke at first. But now, in the stillness of the night, she felt drawn to the mystery. Emily retrieved an old key from the nurse's station, the one that supposedly unlocked the doors to the abandoned section. With her heart pounding, she made her way to the sealed-off wing. The air grew colder as she approached, and the lights flickered ominously as though warning her to turn back. She hesitated for a moment, her breath catching in her throat, but determination, mixed with a hint of recklessness, pushed her forward. The key turned with a loud click, and the door creaked open, revealing a hallway drenched in shadow. Dust filled the air, and the smell of decay lingered. Her flashlight beam swept across old surgical equipment and forgotten beds covered in layers of grime. She walked slowly, the echo of her footsteps the only sound in the hollow corridor. Then, just as she reached the end of the hall, it began, a faint, distant cry. The sound was unmistakable, the pitiful wail of a child, echoing through the cold, lifeless walls. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She froze, listening intently. The cry seemed to come from the old operating room at the end of the hallway, the very room where the child had died. Her hands trembled as she moved closer to the door. The sobs grew louder, filled with pain and anguish. Each cry seemed to pierce her soul, evoking a sorrow so profound that it made her knees weak. The door to the operating room was ajar, barely hanging on its hinges. Emily took a deep breath and pushed it open, her flashlight revealing the once sterile environment now decayed and forgotten. The operating table stood in the center, rusted and abandoned. The room was eerily still, but the sound of the child crying continued to echo around her, though no one was there. Emily's pulse raced as she searched the room, her mind racing. How could there be crying if no one was here? Her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls, and for a moment she thought she saw the faint outline of a figure. A nurse, cradling something small in her arms. The vision was gone as quickly as it had appeared, but the crying persisted. Driven by a deep need to understand, Emily began to piece together the tragic history. The medical error that had caused the baby's death had been covered up by the hospital administration. The grief-stricken mother had never been told the full truth. The room was not just abandoned. It had been a place of unspeakable sorrow, where a life had been lost due to negligence, and the spirit of the baby, it seemed, had never moved on. As she stood there, Emily felt a presence behind her. She turned, her flashlight casting light on an old photograph hung on the wall, a picture of the surgical team from the day of the failed operation. A cold chill ran down her spine as she recognized one of the nurses from her vision. The room felt heavy with the weight of unresolved grief. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply. Emily's breath came out in visible puffs, and the cries of the child grew louder, more desperate, as if the spirit was reaching out to her, begging for help. She felt a cold hand brush against her arm, sending a jolt of fear through her body. The crying escalated into a heart-wrenching wail that filled the room, making it impossible for her to think of anything else. Desperate to escape, Emily backed toward the door, but as she did, she heard a voice, a soft whisper, almost drowned out by the crying. "Help me." Her heart pounded in her chest. She knew she had to leave, but something kept her rooted to the spot. She whispered softly into the empty room, "What do you want?" There was no answer, only the sound of the child's cry. But deep in her heart, Emily knew what the spirit wanted. It wanted justice. It wanted the truth to be revealed. Overwhelmed by fear and sadness, Emily rushed out of the operating room, her heart pounding in her chest. The crying followed her down the hallway, growing fainter as she ran, but it never fully disappeared. She slammed the door behind her, locking the wing back up. The cries, though distant, still echoed in her mind. Back in the brightly lit hallways of the hospital, the feeling of safety returned, but Emily could never shake the haunting memory of that night. The abandoned wing remained sealed, but the sobbing child's cries continued to haunt her dreams. She knew the truth was buried within those walls, a truth that had to be uncovered. But Emily also knew that some spirits were too restless to ever find peace, and the forgotten operating room would forever remain a place of sorrow and lost souls. The legend of the crying child still echoes through the hospital, and to this day, no one dares to enter the abandoned wing. The ghostly cries serve as a reminder of the lives lost and the tragic mistakes that can never be undone.